All right. I I have been asked on different occasions from people how to macro, um, and so I figured I would just make just a brief little guide on kind of what I do. Um, Macros are honestly pretty. They have a pretty similar setup for most situations. The bars that you see, my front bar, this is pretty much my front bar almost all the time. Um, in most of the stuff that I've done. Siphon, Skull, Mystic Orb, Blast Bones, Inner Light, and Meteor, or Shooting Star, whatever. The reason for that, these two in particular, is because max mag increase is really nice. And Meteor in Trash or something like that, if there um, are enough Necros where I don't need to use my Colossus, otherwise just Colossus all the time. Backbar, I have the Arcanist, Wall. I always use Unnerving because I don't really need to take my own synergy. There's usually going to be other macros in the group. And this is really helpful in Trash as well. So the damage is not any different. I'll get back to this fourth slot. This is kind of one of the flex spots. And then your Source and Minor Force. So Barb Trap or Channeled Acceleration. And then, of course, Colossus. So this one, I've seen a lot of people do Mystic Siphon there, or whatever. If you don't need a shield or a self heal, this is where I would put a shield or a self heal if I need one. Um, I think you actually get more out of this using either Scalding Rune or Inner Light. Scalding Rune as a pre-buff to like pre-damage. Let's say the boss is about to spawn, or in VSS, for example, and the dragon is about to land, like after one of its flight phases, I would just throw this puppy down and not cast it again. But I would still get the max mag benefit from Mage's Guildline. Or you can just do Inner Light and have more mag on your back bar. Um, yeah, so that's an option. Or your shield if you need it. That's fine to put there as well. Now this setup works if you're using MS or Mother Sorrow, and I pretty much almost always use Mother Sorrow and Perfected False God on a Magcro. With this, so this is the important part of why my bars are what they are with Mother Sorrow. So with Minor Prophecy from a sorcerer in your group, that'll be 68.9% spell critical, because Minor Prophecy gives plus 6%. I already have Major Prophecy from you either get it from a potion or Inner Light gives it to you as well, just kind of the whole time. Anyway, so one of the passives in the Gravelord skill line. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. Your critical strike chance against enemies under 25% health. Increase your damage increase that by 10% for every Gravelord ability slotted. So you can see my current bonus 30%. What that means in Execute after Minor Prophecy, my spell critical would be 98.9%. Anything over 100% in Execute, you would be losing damage. You'd be wasting it. So that's why I only have 3, because that gives me 30% in Execute. So that's why I don't double bar Colossus. I get more benefit from the max mag. Again, this is just with Mother Sorrow. This is pretty much what I use in all scenarios. Monster Helm, it's either usually either Alambris or Grothzar. Just depends. Yeah. So in terms of rotation, that's what somebody was really asking about. Like, how do I actually do a Magcro? So again, this is the setup I use most of the time. So I will go over kind of how I prioritize stuff as a Magcro. So I'm not going to do like a full parse. That's not what I'm going for. I'm just going for like your like what you prioritize over the course of your rotation. So with that, I'm going to be doing a little slow and explaining it as I go. So you would of course start with your skelly. If you have the Scalding Rune on, you would start with that. You would throw it at your target. And then your minor force, you want to get down as quickly as possible. So in this case would be barb trap. And then blast bones would be very fast. You want to start getting your blast bones in. The thing about the use of corpses, particularly with like the graveyard skill, is you want to make sure to try to have a blast bone, have done a blast bone, and then wall, and then your boneyard. The reason why is because your boneyard is empowered if it consumes a corpse. So you don't really want to the best of your ability, you don't really want to like start attacking an enemy by starting with your dots on a macro like that, and then a blast bone. You would want to have your blast bone before you put those dots down, because it just empowers it. You get more out of it. Same thing with your siphon. So you would want to try to have used up a corpse with your boneyard, and then obviously that's what you do a siphon. You're using a corpse. So the order of stuff, let's see. So blast bone, got my boneyard, that's empowered. It would be at that point, well, I was doing a little slow. It would be at that point I would have used siphon, orb, skull, blast bone, skull, skull. You'll notice my dots are running low. Go to my back bar. Go to my back bar again. Redo archer and trap. Orb, skull, blast bone. Skull, skull, blast bone. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit, because it starts to get a little tricky as you're progressing with a parse on a boss or something, like what you're prioritizing. Sometimes I find myself doing a blast bone, swapping to back bar, and just reapplying archer or trap. I always pair wall and boneyard together. Some people do boneyard first and then wall. I do wall and boneyard first. Doesn't really matter, just as long as you've done your blast bones before you put your boneyard down. That's the most important part with that damage. So archer, or not archer, sorry, that's for Magcro, the little mage dude with barb trap, sometimes you can pair together if you want to get like a really static rotation. But if you're being a little bit more dynamic, you'll refresh one before the other, most likely. So, and you would use your Colossus on a Magcro in place of your skull on the front bar. So I'll show you what I mean by that here in a second. So I'm going to do part of a parse like I would on a boss or something. So I've done my pre-buff stuff, blah, 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 trap, blast bone, starting. So in place, didn't cast, cool. In place of a skull, I use my Colossus. So you notice, here we go. I'm going to get a little dynamic here. I did my orb and then mage and then trap and skull. Because you want to do a blast bone in between every 2 skills on a macro. Oh, my orb. Okay, this is acting. My orb's a little weird because this is a dummy that's like a small target, so I'm refreshing it. I'm saying I need to refresh it sooner than what I would need to. So you'll see I'm always pairing wall and boneyard, and then sometimes casting a little bit early on trap and the little mage dude, which that's fine. Like a couple seconds early. A couple seconds early for barb trap is fine because it takes a couple seconds to arm anyway, so it's not a big deal. Like casting it right there when I had 3 seconds left. You'll notice it just re-triggered when it only had like 1 second left, so that's fine to do. And again, a Colossus in place of a skull. Now granted, if you're in a team, like let's say an optimized team, most mag groups are going to be running, well, pretty much all really serious mag groups are going to be running 3 Magcros, because that's about the amount of time cooldown of major vulnerability between the 3. It can keep it up as much as possible on a boss. Let's say you're the first Colossus on a boss. Some people will try to get all their dots down. I think it's more helpful to the group to just get your Blast Bone, Wall, Boneyard, and then just do your Colossus. So you kind of screw up your rotation just a little bit, but it's better for the group. Some people are trying to push their extra, like, I don't know, 300 DPS or something. I don't know. I just don't think it's helpful for the group. So what I mean by that, I'll show you. Like you'll see in parses, people, I'm not going to use my Colossus, but I'll say when people use it, would use it in their parse or something. Let's see, we're getting our pre-buff stuff, blah, blah, blah. I've done all this. Okay, I'm doing my stuff. Hell yeah. Then I would use it right there, because all my dots are down, and then you'd start getting your single target stuff. What I like to do, if like I'm the first person to use my Colossus in a group, I would do something like this, pre-buff. It's really not much of a difference, but it just helps, because it would line up with major force a little bit and other people's ultis a little bit longer, for like 2 or 3 seconds longer. And it doesn't really screw up your parse that much. So that's pretty much it on a Magcro. I'll go over my CP here in a second too, but again, Blast Bone, always pair Wall with Boneyard. That's what I do. And then the rest can be a little dynamic, but you're really only keeping track of like you're anchoring your rotation on Blast Bone, Wall, and Boneyard basically. And then in Execute for a Magcro, I don't change anything. I don't drop anything in Execute. I wouldn't refresh my dots at like 2% of the boss or something, if like the boss is dying really fast or something. But I don't change anything really in my rotation and Execute on a Magcro. Yeah, so CP that I'm trying out for this patch that I've actually liked, I've noticed that I've gotten about 1 to 1.5k higher single target, as with using off balance CP, and which off balance CP just gives you stronger cleave. So off balance CP, what do I mean by that? You get exploiter. Increase your damage done against off balance enemies by 10%, but you have to have 75 in this tree. Off balance happens on an enemy, like on a boss or trash or whatever, with lightning walls. That kind of like initializes it basically. Anyway, so you want to make sure that your supports are running lightning staves, and at least one, if not maybe a couple, have lightning wall that they are using to create off balance. So I would do 72 thumb, and the reason why I'm 3 piercing is because 75 thumb. I'll just show you. So you see 23%. The way that CP is working still is that would actually round down on your CP. It would round down to 23%. So you're basically wasting 3 CP, but you need 3 more. So if you're using Barb Trap at any point, which you do a lot as mag, or at least you should if you're standing in front of the boss, this could potentially help just a little bit with your Barb Trap DPS. There's really no point not to, because it does nothing here. Again, this is what I'm trying. I might actually change it up. I don't know. 56 Master at Arms, 27 Staff Expert. That's your light attacks, your direct damage, and then 56 in these two. One thing that you can change if there's sustain issues happening, like major sustain issues, and there's like everything that supports can do to help whatever, right? And you're not overcasting, like all this other stuff. Because with my current CP, you're missing out on this arcane well. So when you kill an enemy, you have a 20% chance to restore 3900 mag for up to 3 friendly targets within 2.5 meters of the enemy. So anywhere that there's cleave happening, like in trash, this is going to help supports or DPS if they're up close. Like this just can help sustain, basically. So I'm 8 points short of 120, as you can see. So if you want, this is another option. It will not hurt your DPS that much, really at all, I think. I think this does get a little bit more, but it's not a big difference. You can take 8 out of Staff Expert and put 8 into Elemental Expert, because the next jump point is at 64 points. So it actually lines up perfectly. So then you'd have this Arcane Well 100 with 120 in there. And you'd still be fine here. You'd still have 75, which would give you the jump point here of 5% increase of damage done with light attacks in X cube. So you kind of have to weigh like what your group needs with that part. I'm just trying this way. I've liked the results so far. I haven't gotten to raid test it a whole lot yet, but I've liked it so far. The nice thing about why some people are going to an off-balance CP in terms of taking advantage of this exploiter is with the Harrowstorm dropping. One of the changes that they made is they upped off balance on trash packs from 5 seconds to 7 seconds. Now they did that on bosses some time ago, where bosses have off balance for 7 seconds versus 5. But it being true for trash now actually means this could help with cleave just that little extra more for an extra 2 seconds, which comes down to a lot, honestly. And when you think all your dots ticking, all your damage ticking for an extra 2 seconds can add up. So that is how I Magcro. Again, I pretty much use almost the same setup everywhere. I mean, obviously there's stuff that's contextual. It depends on the trial, blah, 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 et cetera, what your role is, whatever. But that's a lot of what I do. And then in terms of rotation, that's what I said is pretty much what I do all the time. That's how I've done it. I've seen it do okay at it. Yeah, so if you have follow-up questions, just let me know. And hopefully this was